Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another live stream. We are live. 220 of you already locked in. That number is only going to grow. So if I can ask you guys very kindly to go ahead and leave us a like, a thumbs up, not a thumbs down. We're still using a Mac, guys. We're having some technical difficulties right off the bat. It's been an interesting week for the markets from a regulatory point of view. Lots of regulatory news today that I covered in my daily market update, so we're going to leave that be. Lots of interesting news in regards to BlackRock, lots of interesting news in regards to who the real Satoshi is, and I want to know your opinions to start the video off on who you think Satoshi truly is. Do you think it's Len Sessamon? Do you think it's Peter Todd? I thought the argument that they put forward was a very weak one in regards to essentially Satoshi not logging into his alias and using his real identity. The HBO documentary very much hinted that that was Peter Todd, and replying to himself or continuing a thread, it very much looked like a reply to me. So we think they all don't hold much weight, and it's, you know, Bitcoin is quite likely a sort of intelligence service experiment that has kind of escaped the lab, if you will, and reached velocity like we see many technologies follow a similar route. I love your Mac all in. Yeah, I know. It really does me at the worst times. Hopefully that's the only hiccup that we have, but we shall see. 325 of you in here. Guys, it's been a very interesting week. Let's get into it all. We've got a lot to cover. Predominantly, we're going to be looking at the markets, and we're going to be looking at what is going to be behind this bull market. Well, it's the same thing that's behind pretty much every bull market, and that is global liquidity. We're going to be looking at some economists' take on the current economic environment. We're using the US for a barometer for the broader world, as it's the largest economy out there. And we're going to be showing that things look good. We don't see a recession in sight. Ultimately, we think the liquidity cycles are going to rinse and repeat. The global liquidity index is going to rinse and repeat. This is going to drive business cycles. It's going to drive the Bitcoin 4-year cycle. And ultimately, the markets are just preparing for it. And we're going to be looking at the crypto markets and the positioning of them, starting off with Bitcoin, looking at the total market caps, and then going into some of those altcoins that we've mentioned. We mentioned lots of falling wedges. We mentioned lots of stage 2 breakouts. We'll be reiterating all of them. And that's really the topic of this live stream, is talking about how it's not going to be too long, guys, that you're going to have to wait in regards to what's coming. And this is the whole concept of investing. And I want to pull on the screen a quote from Warren Buffett to start things off, because many of you out there, I'm sure, are feeling the fatigue. And this is a quote from Warren Buffett, who has a very large cash position right now that people seem to consistently bring up in regards to being a reason why you shouldn't be in the markets. And I don't think that's the case. I think Warren Buffett's cash position in terms of percentage of his overall portfolio is less than what it was in 2018. Warren Buffett has always famously had quite a lot of cash on the sidelines, sometimes more than others, but it hasn't always been a barometer for negativity to strike. And certainly when we look at economic data, we'll be reiterating our stance on that. The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. And what do we notice retail sentiment is right now in regards to the cryptocurrency space? Very, very impatient. Let's kick the video off. Fatigue is a nice way to put it. Guys, I'm right there with you. And I remember buying in 2018, 2019 and feeling the exact same way. I remember being on holiday and checking my portfolio, or on a date and checking my portfolio. Yes, that's right. I have been on date, guys, despite what some of you may think. And I remember checking my portfolio and being like, it's down again. You know, what's going on? I remember I was in XRP at the time. I'd recently pivoted heavily into Chainlink, started getting on board with Cardano and things like this that did very well in the last cycle. And I feel like those feelings are what some of you guys are going through today. I feel like I'm more equipped at dealing with them because of that experience. You know, we sort of evolve as human beings throughout our life due to experiences. And I feel like I've been there, done that. And when we look technically at the way markets are positioned and the macro backdrop that's going to drive markets, I feel like when it walks and talks and quacks like a duck, ladies and gentlemen, it's a duck. Leave your ducks in the comment section. 441 of you already, guys. Go ahead and smash that like. We are coming to you live on Friday. Let's kick things off by looking at the markets. For those of you that don't use allincrypto.com, it's about time that you started to do so. We have essentially brought Coin Market Cap, Cointelegraph, CoinDesk, all in one place in our own sort of versions of it. And here we have essentially what you could also find on Altcoin Market Cap. We have our own version of this. And what I want to do is just look at how the markets are doing. So the markets are up today. It's been an interesting week. We had CPIs coming out just the other day, and they came out with a 0.1% deduction. We think the Fed is actually, and we're going to look at a tweet when we start talking about the sort of economic environment in just a second, talking about how the Fed have actually got things rather right this time. A lot of people would just, when I say that, it stirs up emotions. It stirs up anger. How can you possibly say the Fed have got things right? Well, they have, I'm afraid, in regards to the economic environment that we're currently in. Certainly according to the stats that the labor statistics are responsible for, so on and so forth. Whether you believe those stats or not is another story. And I'm the first to admit, guys, they're quite likely manipulated. But in regards to the markets, today is a good day. And when we look at a yearly change, when we look at a 30-day change, when we look at a 7-day change and a 24-hour change, this is the top 50, guys. I mean, look at this. Some done better than others. Something like NIR in a year is up 365%. Bitcoin up 120%. BNB, by the way, we think is going to do well. Why? I'm fundamentally not up to date with BNB, but I've got, I think it's a $2,650-something price prediction that we can maybe fly out when we get into the chart. Solana up a whopping 548%. Cryptos are moving up. You know, I have cryptocurrencies like Fetch. I also held AGIX, the Singularity Net token, that did very, very well for me, that are still up hundreds of percent. Something like Arweave. Unfortunately, I wish I'd sold right at the top and bought back down now, but that's not the reality, I don't think, of investing. You're never going to be able to time those peaks and troughs in what is a broader uptrend. And we do think there's a broader uptrend for the altcoin market. But when we look at things generally, it's not such a doom and gloom picture, isn't it? Even something like ADA up 40% a year to date, you've beat the S&P's returns. The S&P looks magnificent at the moment in regards to technically how it's so much further ahead than its prior high. However, Bitcoin has still performed it year to date. So probably as the likes of Cardano, you know? And this is the thing with the crypto market. Because of the volatility of it, people often get lost in that volatility. They're holding on to the shit for dear life and not sort of looking at the journey and the course that they're on and just the progress they've made on it. And we will be talking about that when we look at the markets. We think markets move in 4 phases. I think most altcoins are really at that bottoming phase. Maybe there's an answer here in regards to what we're going to look at in the macro that's going to drive the micro, so to speak, crypto in regards to global liquidity and the uplifting of that, which we think is to come. And we're going to look at a number of barometers for this, is really going to see those sea levels rise and all the boats upon it, whether that be small cap stocks that we're seeing similar altcoin-esque patterns in, housing ETFs, which have now broken out. And, you know, we did call this pre-break. We were even looking at Chinese ETFs before we knew about what the People's Bank of China was doing. The market's generally up. What are the top gainers today? Dog, whiff, hat. We are so early, guys. Let me tell you, we are extremely early. Dog, whiff, hat. We did do a meme coin video. We said meme season is upon us. We looked at, and we will be looking at Dogecoin and Shiba. We were looking at falling wedge. We were also looking at them both being acceptable, in our opinion, as stage 2 breakouts. Phase 1 base. Phase 2 is essentially an uptrend after your base. Wyckoff looked at it as accumulation and then an uptrend. People only talk about Wyckoff's accumulation distribution schematics, but there was a whole sort of 4-part series to that market cycle. You know, the Wall Street cheat sheet looks at it. You've got all this sort of depression, disbelief, and then you go into sort of a more broad uptrend. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So you've got Dog Wi-Fi hat. Sweet. People always clown me for saying that wrong. I really couldn't care less. Sui's a very interesting project. It seems very favorited, doesn't it? The thing I like about Sui, by the way, guys, is that we all heard about Facebook's Libra, and then it became something like Deus or Demo or something like that, and then it just never happened. And the interesting thing about Mystic Labs is they all now went over to Sui. So the people that were building Facebook's Libra are now the people behind Sui. And I do wonder slightly, is there going to be some sort of a crossover there in regards to Facebook or Meta now using Sui? Sui is a very interesting concept. It's very different. It's infinitely scalable, basically based on the same thing that Web 2 companies are, hardware, and which we really like. It's not bound necessarily by, it's not bound by, you know, block space basically, and those kinds of, or block size, I should say, and those kind of parameters. It's really based on machinery behind it, and it can really scale vertically upwards, which is quite interesting. BitTensor, an AI project, very interesting project. Optimism, a layer 2. I've got to admit, I'm not a big fan of layer 2s. I think we're in a world now where you kind of don't need the problem to begin with. So we have blockchains, we have cryptocurrency, we have DAGs now that don't need to be scaled with layer 2s. They're scalable at the layer 1, or built into their design is a layer 2 without them actually being layer 2. So look at something like Avalanche, some of these other protocols out there. Cardano very much moving that way. Polkadot does that with their parachains. They basically have the beating heart and then multiple layers of concurrent chains, parachains, parallel system. So I don't really think we need layer 2s. And I also am not convinced Ethereum is going to remain on that top spot in regards to a layer 1 smart contract protocol. But we shall see. Right now, it's in the lead. I think it's going to be a while before Ethereum really loses ground. And of course, they are doing some interesting things in regards to innovating. They're looking at sharding and multiple things. The artificial superintelligence, FET, a holding of mine, something that we've done very well. And I think AI is going to engulf the world in more ways than one. And we need blockchains in many ways to accompany that revolution. They're revolutions that go hand in hand, kind of like the engine and cars. The engine was kind of is exactly that. It's the engine, but the car's the vehicle in which it moves in. You could see blockchains playing a similar role in regards to AI, I think. So the artificial and superintelligence is up. You've got the likes of Pepe, meme season. We did say it's here, guys. Injective. We've not looked at Injective in a little while. Maybe we'll fly by that if any of you guys want to. Shiba Sheeb, Near Protocol. They've also pivoted very heavily into AI and really hoping to interview some people in regards to Near Protocol. Render, Stacks, Solana, Aptos, Doge, IMX. A lot of people don't talk about IMX anymore, but interesting project. I think GameFi is a real opportunity. And you can see this is still 187% up year to date. So we've been buying cryptocurrencies since the start of 2023 when Bitcoin was 16, 17K. That's where we pivoted from being bearish to back. Okay, now we think markets are bottom. We were looking at the S&P. We were looking at generally things. And we've seen these kind of returns. Before Bitcoin started pulling back, everything was green. We've seen a lot of fluctuation. We do think there's going to be a resumption of what is a broader uptrend. But that's enough from us. Even something like Cardano up slightly today. What's the biggest loser? Uniswap. Uniswap did very well. We had a falling wedge on Uniswap, the Leo token. How many of you guys can tell me what the Leo token actually does? Maybe not that many, including myself. Monero, poor Monero. I love the idea of Monero. Monero was very much a kind of second or third love for me. I think everybody starts off with Bitcoin. Certainly if you were investing in the 2017 days. My first interaction with Bitcoin was in 2012 through hearing about people interacting with a website that utilized Bitcoin, but not actually partaking myself. I can't even remember who it was that was doing that. But Monero was something I really stumbled upon. I really like the idea of it. It's true privacy in regards to the blockchain space. But the question you've got to ask is something like that going to succeed? The world as we know it, it doesn't work in regards to secretly transacting with one another. And a lot of governments and nation states and United Nations would have a beef against that, I think. So poor Monero, even though we root for it, I'm not really that bullish on it. Athena, this is their new stable coin. I think this has something to do with BlackRock. XRP obviously got hit pretty hard on the back end of the appeal, etc., etc. So market's generally up. Certainly when you look year to date and you look 30 days and you look 7 days, is the sentiment really reflecting this? I don't think it is. I think the sentiment's very frustrated because we want things now. But remember what Warren Buffett said, the markets are a device for taking money from the impatient and giving it to the patient. I want you guys to be patient. I want you to see the bigger picture of things. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this live stream. So I'll take a quick look at some of your questions, see what you guys are currently saying. And then we're going to be diving over to some news from Charles Schwab. First of all, we're going to be looking at some BlackRock news, but we will be looking at some news from the likes of Charles Schwab. I think Charles Schwab is near a $10 trillion asset manager that did a survey recently, and the cryptocurrency findings was interesting. But first, let me take a quick look at your questions just to see if there are any. Thoughts on XLR? We will get round to all these questions. Algorand, what a piece of something. Works well, though. So there was an individual, I'll tell you a quick story on Algorand before we move on more broadly. There was an individual who used to work at Android and helped get Android to 1 billion users that now is a lead position at the Algorand Foundation. What you notice with the cryptocurrency space, when you look at the boards, when you look at the directors, when you look at the teams of many of the top cryptocurrencies out there, like Algorand, which is a top cryptocurrency, very impressive technology, the price action may not be in line with that, is a lot of the people that were fundamental in enabling Web 2 are now in Web 3 and looking to do the same thing. And if you think about Android and what it is, it's actually quite similar to a blockchain in many regards. Guys, there's 631 of you in here. Let's smash those likes. Let's pump it up on this Friday. The ducks are coming. Yeah, let's talk about that. So let's dive over to very quickly a tweet here from Eric Balanchunas. Now, if you're not already following Eric, you need to do so. Certainly if you're interested in inflows in regards to ETFs, not just crypto ETFs, but ETFs more broadly, he is absolutely fantastic. He is an individual that has really been at the forefront of reporting on the Bitcoin ETFs and the success of the Bitcoin ETFs. Remember, guys, Bitcoin is the fastest growing ETF in history. In the last year, Ethereum is second to only Bitcoin in regards to ETF inflows and sort of progress. It's clear demand for this industry. And this is why Bitcoin is put in a high pre-halving. And people say, okay, what that does is that throws out the Bitcoin 4-year cycle theory, which we're going to be looking at. I would say no. Actually, it's a more bullish thing than it is bearish thing. We're generally following the Bitcoin 4-year cycle theory, which overlaps with global liquidity and PMI cycles. We are going to be coming on to that once we've got over some interesting news. And we're going to be looking at all this. And we're going to be showing you that the markets are where they should be, and the markets are a device for taking money from the impatient and giving them to the patient. We want you guys to be patient and hang on for what is to come. When this market gets going, and when those clogs start turning, it's going to be unbelievable for some. I fully remember 2020, 2021, the latter half of 2020 and 2021. It's almost unbelievable. And you can get carried away in that. You know, we weren't some of the first people out the door when Bitcoin got to 64 or 69K. We got out a little bit later on as that bear market really started to take hold, certainly going into 2022, the start of 2022. We sort of pivoted. We said, okay, enough's enough. This market's going to continue to go down. And then we got back in. What's coming, I think, is truly going to change people's lives. I have people all the time, all in, I've only got 500 quid or I've got, you know, a couple of thousand. And, you know, everyone's talking about how they got this, that, and the other. Start somewhere. Because the alternative is you keep that money in your bank account and it does what? Buys you less and less pieces of bread, less and less milk, you know, gets you less and less in regards to a deposit. House prices are going to go up. Everything is going to continue up. The great game of money devaluation is going to continue until the game of musical chairs stops. And I think we're going to do a live stream at some point where we have a number of individuals on the show to talk to us about those chairs stopping looks like. Is it the debt crisis? Bonds failing? Or is it what I don't think many people are looking at in regards to a more orderly fashion of an innovation of the current system? So I used to believe that Bitcoin and crypto was going to replace the current system. Now I just think it's going to intertwine with it and enable it to more of a degree. A little bit doom and gloom, but, you know, it is what it is, guys, you know, at the end of the day. So let's start off here. We did report on this in the week in our daily market updates. This is from Eric Balanchunas, a guy you should be following. An amazing photo here. If you stop and think about it, the largest asset manager in the world making a well-polished case for Bitcoin to clients with a ginormous chart of the decimation of the dollar's purchasing power since the establishment of the Fed. Life moves fast. I think the similarities between how they managed to get the Federal Reserve Act through and what's currently going on with Bitcoin. One reason I'm skeptical of Bitcoin is due to BlackRock's involvement in it. I think if it was a serious threat and wasn't part of perhaps a broader plan, BlackRock, and you wouldn't see the kind of embracement of it that we have seen. You know, you wouldn't, if the United States thought it was going to topple their role as a world reserve leader, and there wasn't a plan to move towards globalization, and Bitcoin didn't play a role in that, or crypto more generally, it would have been toppled. I truly do believe that. That's just my importance. But this is extremely bullish, in my opinion. We know Larry Fink's been on television a number of times talking about this. CNBC, Fox, talking about how Bitcoin transcends all other currencies. You also speak about how it's risk off in regards to turmoil with currencies. You know, the case for Bitcoin is absolutely being made. And I think this is why Bitcoin put in a high pre-halving for the first time ever. This is a more bullish thing than a bearish thing. If you look at where Bitcoin is typically in regard to halvings, it's right where it should be. If you look at where altcoins are typically in regards to halvings, it's right where it should be. And you should take comfort in that. I think altcoins are a lot more sensitive to global liquidity and the macro environment, just like small cap stocks, than the likes of Bitcoin. Just like large cap stocks led small cap stocks. And now you're seeing the IWM finally break out and all these smaller cap stocks. It's very interesting, isn't it? And we used Stan Druckenmiller, one of the greatest investors of all time, 30 years of positive returns on an average, insane track record. He moved from NVIDIA down to the IWM and everyone clowned him for it. And, you know, there's volatility that was chop, but the bigger picture confirms it. And that picture, that reason for him going into the IWM from NVIDIA is the same reason why altcoins are going to do well. We're going to talk about all of that. MicroSoft or MicroStrategy doing very well today. We did look at MicroStrategy on the small time frames in regards to going into FOMC. Eric Balanchunas also talking about how Schwab's respondents said they plan to invest in crypto ETFs more than bonds, international alts, and pretty stunning. This is very, very interesting. You can see in terms of the people, Schwab, one of the largest asset managers in the world, out of everybody they interviewed or the correspondence that they had in regards to their survey, 45% of them said they're going to be investing in regards to crypto and the ETF products over bonds and fixed income. Real assets, international equities, and alternatives. That's pretty insane, isn't it? And this is all still to come, largely. I think we've not seen anywhere near the amount of allocation towards the Bitcoin ETFs and the Ethereum ETFs as what we're going to see. And that those dominoes are falling in regards to ETFs being enabled for the altcoin market and the space more broadly. We might fly by crypto ETPs. Let's now talk about the economic environment and how we think it's a supportive one. So we're not and haven't been in the camp of catastrophe around the corner. We've very much been in the opposing camp that actually we agreed with Larry Fink going into this year. We said there's going to be no landing. There's not going to be a soft landing or a hard landing. There's going to be no landing due to largely what the Treasury were doing and how even though the Fed were doing QE, the Treasury were kind of doing Q, or the Fed were doing QT, the Treasury were kind of doing QE. They were still releasing and kind of issuing a hell of a lot of bonds into the market, most notably short dated, and that kind of kept things afloat. And we've gotten to the stage that we're at now, largely without anything breaking. And some may say, okay, well, you had the Silicon Valley Bank issues that got dealt with very quickly. Actually, those issues, I think, sped up the bullish case more so than the bearish case, because what they did was they showed the Fed's willingness to step into the markets and support them. They bailed them out to the same tune as what they bailed out the 2008 financial crisis. This is how much further ahead the monetary system is currently at. There's a lot more money now, just like so when people look at Buffett's portfolio allocation in regards to cash, I say, well, there's a lot of cash there. There's record numbers of cash. In terms of percentages, the whole pie has got a lot larger. So him, as successful as he has been and in the way he's grown with it, not against it, like most people are, generally is going to be bigger. It's natural to think that he's going to have more cash because we live in a world where there just is more money in existence. And if you look at assets, they go straight up with the money supply. And if you look at the top 1% of earners, they go up with it. The charts move perfectly together. This is why everybody should be an investor. I'm not saying everybody should be a crypto investor. Some of you definitely shouldn't. Some people are not emotionally mature enough. I'm sure I was there at one point also to be involved in the crypto space, in my opinion. But we've gotten to this point where the economy, certainly from as an observer, is not in such a bad position. There are, of course, cases where people aren't doing great. Of course, that's life. This is how things go. But generally, when you look at the overall picture, things aren't as bad as perhaps some may make it out to be. I don't think we're in a recession. I don't think we're going into a recession. I think we're getting consistent contrary data for that. We had the highest servicing PMIs in over a year. Actual manufacturing PMIs are still a little bit down, but we think they're going to uptick with global liquidity. And we think we're in this really interesting spot where things are okay and they're about to get even better on the back end of central banks lowering their interest rates, increasing credit creation, and thus sort of boosting everything, rising everything up. And I think that's sort of waterline being risen in regards to global liquidity is what's ultimately going to see the altcoin market do very, very well. It's going to be a far greater beneficiary than Bitcoin, which in regards to assets, do we have a chart on this? I know Lynn Alden did a piece on it. Here we go. This is Lynn Alden's report, and she spoke about directional alignment with global liquidity in 12 months. Bitcoin is the most correlated. So let's talk about this. Let's get into it all. Let's start things off with reading this tweet. This is from Jurian Timmer, who is obviously the director of global macro at Fidelity. He goes on to say, Fed seems to have threaded the needle just right so far. And in brackets there, he's put so far because, you know, things can always go horribly wrong. The yield curve's uninverted. Typically, that leads to some sort of a crash or a disaster. However, the lag of that varies massively. People don't look at that. They just look at the, okay, well, now we should all be on high alert. Well, yeah, we should be a little bit more alert. The probabilities of a recession have now increased, but the S&P will rally within 2 months of a recession, meaning we'll only start to price in a recession 2 months prior to one actually happening. If you don't think we're 2 months away, the markets are going to go higher. And we see new all-time highs being met for the S&P and technical patterns that are going to take it even higher. We also used that to sort of confirm that we didn't think anything was going to happen in regards to, or there was going to be an escalation. I shouldn't say that. There was going to be an all-out escalation in regards to what took place this week, or was it last weekend, in regards to Iran-Israel. The markets aren't going to go higher on all-out escalation, I'm afraid. And we don't think, based on what the markets, I'm not a geopolitical guy, I don't really follow that in depth, but I think based on what the market's telling us, I'm a technical analyst, we're not going to have that escalation because markets are destined to go higher. He goes on to say, starting its cycle off, policy normalization from restrictive 5.25 to 5, eventually to neutral 3.5 to 4.5 by his estimate. So he thinks inflation is going to be elevated based on that. The rate of inflation continues to edge closer to the Fed's target of 2%. It came out at 2.4 a couple of days ago, while the labor market has worked off its pandemic-era excess labor demand. And you can see these are all the charts that he's showing you here, certainly in regards to inflation. And this is the sort of SOFR curve that he's got in place here. You've got the Fed funds right here. You've got core PCE, and you've got super core PCE. You can see how these are all coming down. He goes on to say, and he's referring here to last Friday's non-farm payroll. Payrolls come out of the first Friday of every month. We had a really strong labor market come out. Whether that's true or not is still to be seen. You know, there's been a lot of revision to the downside. I think there was revision to the upside on not the last one, but the one prior. There's a lot of things that go into inflation that people need to take into account. First of all, we were all locked down and the entire economy was shut down. Now that, I would wager, is going to skew labor stats like you wouldn't believe because it directly affects it in a big way. You also have high levels of migration, and we're not going to debate that. There's always somebody in the comment section that wants to have a detailed debate about immigration, whether it's a good thing net or a bad thing net. I think there's good and bad things. There's always a silver lining in life. But immigration is massively elevated. And this is also going to skew the labor markets. And actually, the person that came up with the Sharm index, she also spoke about this and how this has skewed her nearly 100% hit rate of a recessionary metric. So last Friday, the Friday's employment report, following an early jobs report, shows the labor market potentially reaching the state of balance. Now the trick is for it to stay there. We know from history that the labor market pendulum tends to swing from one extreme to another. So for it to stop right there or right here at the zero line would be quite an achievement. Now, I actually do think this is going to be the case. The worrying thing with inflation is as it started to uptick, historically what's happened is it's continued to do that. And the markets are generally inversely correlated like a seesaw with that. So inflation upticks, markets come down. Inflation's at a low, markets at a high. Employment at a low, markets at a high. And the kind of pause on, okay, that acceleration has made people think, okay, markets might not do that bad. And actually, this has now gone on to affect forward interest rate pricing in regards to them being a little bit more, I guess, hawkish or less zealous to cut in such an aggressive manner. It's not just the Fed that are cutting. BOE's Bank of England's Andrew Bailey also came out and said he's thinking about doing a 50 and a more aggressive cut which I'm sure we'd all appreciate from. We always have that argument with mortgage brokers that try and get you to fix or remortgage at this fixed rate. And we're saying, well, it just doesn't make sense right now, right? At least wait and see if you're already paying the high rate for those mortgage rates to come down. And I'm of the camp that they are going to come down. I'm not a mortgage broker, by the way, guys. He goes on to say, following the strong jobs report last week, the market has walked back its expectations for multiple jumbo rate cuts. We're back to a more normalized trajectory of 25 basis point cuts and a higher terminal point, which makes sense. As a result, rates backed up last week with the dollar index following suit. The dollar continues to be held captive by interest rate differentiators. And that's really what we've seen a lot of this year, is a repricing of this. You can see here he's got on the yields and the dollar. So I'm not sure what yield chart this is. It's the 10-year yields, I'd say, by the looks of it. Nevertheless, the Fed is cutting rates. The People's Bank of China is firing a big bazooka, and other central banks around the world are also easing mode, with the exception of the BOJ. Have the Bank of Australia lowered rates yet? So some of you have got to be Aussies in the comment section. I don't know if the Bank of Australia have lowered rates yet. So they might be another one, but they're expected to. That's the important thing. It's no surprise that global liquidity cycle is on the rise again. And with it, stocks, gold, and Bitcoin. The global money supply, as estimated by Bloomberg, is at an all-time high of $107 trillion because the great game continues. And this is what they have global liquidity at. In regards to cycles that he just mentioned, we've looked at this in great detail and used this as one barometer in regards to overlapping cycles that global liquidity is going to rise. What is Bitcoin? The most correlated asset to global liquidity, according to a study done by Lynn Oldham. This was originally from Julian Bittel, I think, but this has been obviously taken and rebranded all over Twitter. This is GMI, so I think that stands for the Global Macro Investor, which is Raoul's platform. This is them looking at the total global liquidity and looking at a breakout of it and what historically has taken place. And this is an individual, before we get on to this commenting on the Fed liquidity surge, this is a TradingView Global Liquidity Index. It paints a slightly different picture, but if you look at Global M2, this is at all-time highs. So this is very much, let's pull the S&P up and wait for this to load. What leads things, right? So there's a bit of a divergence here because the way this global liquidity index is worked out is a little bit more complex. But in regards to money supply, it looks just like the markets, doesn't it? And that's because this is the great game that people need to understand. Let's get this off here because it's not really helping. But in regards to global liquidity, and let's put the BLX back on, the Brave New Liquid Coin Index. We're at this turning point now. Every bull market for Bitcoin has had an element of expanding global liquidity. It's also had an element of dollar weakness, which is what, if the dollar's strong, generally liquidity isn't going to be expanding. There's a little bit of discorrelation there, but you can see we've got the dollar in purple here. Dollar rolls, liquidity up, markets up. Dollar rolls, liquidity up, crypto up. You can see here, liquidity up, dollar rolls, and so on and so forth. And when the dollar's strong, when liquidity is not forthcoming, on the back end of central banks manipulating currencies, the largest being the dollar, ultimately the markets don't do well. We've got the adverse of that ahead of us. There's overlap in regards to economic cycles and global liquidity, which we're expecting to rise. This is the PMI, Purchasing Manufacturing Index. We're waiting for this to uptick. We think it will do in line with servicing PMIs. Perhaps not to the same degree, but I think you're going to see a shocker in regards to that department. And ultimately, this is the backdrop that sees markets do very, very well. Let's go back to this tweet now before we look at global liquidity in relation to altcoins and why global liquidity might be the key to understanding why altcoins haven't done what Bitcoin has done. Some of them have, but typically the ones that have sort of institutionalized status. So Solana, up until the Ethereum ETF, a little bit of law for you here, had more inflows in regards to ETPs, exchange-traded products, than Ethereum did. That explains why it's done so well. And we'll get onto that in just a second. This is a tweet from Thomas. Fed liquidity surges just beginning. And it's logical to think that with them lowering interest rates. Again, it's why we think housing's going. It's why we think everything's going up. Net Federal Reserve liquidity has increased by around $100 billion over recent days to kick off Q4. I also want to highlight this, that national debt went up by $1/3 trillion for the US in 3 days. How can you... The game really is, they print money, and that money gets devalued. The other equation there is the assets that those that are priced in monetary terms go up because they don't inflate to the same degree. Milton Friedman gave that great example of when you could use tobacco in the US as a currency. Everybody started growing tobacco. Instead of needing one leaf to go and get yourself a loaf of bread, you now needed 10. You know, and this is the great game. And we're at this stage now where the system is so big, it's like a snowball rolling down the hill. Starts off small, gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The question is does it sort of crash into a wall at the end and implode? And, you know, what does that look like? Or do they come up with a way of diverting it? And the fact that Bitcoin was introduced to us, and we've seen the progression that we've seen in regards to Bitcoin's own success and the continued destruction of the monetary system, I think deserves people asking some questions about. You know, it seems a little bit too good to be true to me. I could be 100% wrong. And I think Bitcoin has done some great things. I love that story about Bhutan. Buddhist country, prioritize people's happiness, the 4th largest holder of Bitcoin. And most of you would never have even heard of Bhutan. I certainly haven't, using my own ignorance there to predict on you guys and what you might or might not have heard of. Some of you are probably maybe a little bit better at geography or well-traveled than I am. Let's get back to this because we're getting all over the place. So this comes after a $340 billion drop at the end of Q3. Obviously on the back end of them continuing to do QT in regards to running off their balance sheet. And by running off, we don't mean selling. We mean just letting them run out of date, the bonds that they hold. I think it's likely this recent surge will generally continue over the coming weeks and months. This is because the Treasury General Account is likely to spend down somewhat liquidity injection ahead of the US government debt ceiling deadline on January the 1st. Remember the last time they upped the debt ceiling? And that reverse repo where they've gone and got money from the Treasury, not got it from the Fed predominantly, and that's how they've been buying their bonds that they've been issuing into essentially out there. The reverse repo is at 2.6 trillion. It's now like 300 billion. They're running out of room there. The Fed's going to have to step back in. There's so many angles that lead to continued proliferation of the monetary system, global liquidity cycles increasing, and technically we're about to dive into the crypto markets, let alone the broader markets, which are all aligned. When it walks and when it walks and talks and quacks like a duck, ladies and gentlemen, it's a duck. So it goes on to say, then, if a new debt ceiling alignment isn't imminently reached, likely because they like to sort of, we're going to let the debt fail. We're not going to let the debt fail. We're going to implode America. We're not going to implode America. They're never going to, if they can have the choice between just printing more money and doing more of what they've done, they're going to do that. They're not going to not up it, but there's always this kind of, we want this from you in order to do, there's always this kind of political, bureaucratic nonsense that goes on around that. The Treasury General Account balance will probably decrease further through early 2025, which equals more liquidity. All good news for liquidity in general, with the People's Bank of China also starting to inject cash into money markets over recent weeks. They've literally been openly buying the market in China. I expect this is likely going to continue. The 2 previous periods that saw sizable liquidity additions from both the Fed and the People's Bank of China simultaneously were around January to April 2023 and around October 2023 to February 2024. Both periods saw strong asset price appreciation, particularly gold and Bitcoin. I will try to put together a long thread on this. So do go and give this guy a follow. This was a good thread, actually. Not that long out. But generally, we think the game of liquidity, global liquidity cycles, are on track and likely to rinse and repeat. And this is ultimately going to drive the markets more broadly. When we look at the altcoin market, we can get rid of some of this now, like the Dixie. We don't really want to do too much of a dive on the Dixie. But when we look at something like ETH, US dollar, okay, this is done a little bit better because it's had that institutional inflow. It wasn't really, altcoins didn't really get rocking and rolling using Bitcoin, Ethereum as the king altcoin until global liquidity started upticking, according to this metric. Let's use something like HBAR. HBAR is one of our favorite altcoins, by the way. I think it's very much an institutional grade altcoin. You can see the correlation here, can't you? just like we saw with ETH there. And the upticking of this is really going to rise many ships, certainly the altcoin ships. And certainly you're seeing signs of life in the altcoin market, which we're going to come on to in just a second. But you're also seeing it in regards to the stock market. There's a lot of stocks. PayPal was one I was looking at recently. Roblox. You know, these are getting ready to break out on that uptick of global liquidity. I hope what I'm showing here makes sense. Palantir, I know there's a community member that's a big fan of Palantir. If you want to join the community, guys, link in the description. I'll be doing an update for the Patreons on some of our picks a little bit later on. Something like Triumph. You can see the correlation with global liquidity here. This is broken out, retesting. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Let us now talk about the markets more generally. First of all, I'm going to dive back over to the chat and see what you guys have to say. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Ducks all around. Sweden in here. Sweden in the house. Nice to have you. We are going to the moon. I think we will do eventually, you know, and we've spoken about the reasons why we think this is going to be the case. It's macro driven. The same reasoning why prior bull markets have taken place are going to be the same reasons why it's going to take place again. Yeah, there's this great fundamental narrative of Bitcoin and crypto broadly. You know, one thing I've come to realize is that fundamentals largely don't matter as much as people think they do. They do matter, of course, but when it comes to price, not really. You know, we always use that example of Amazon after the dot-com crash. It took nearly 7 years in a very XRP-like pattern, by the way. I know a lot of you don't like XRP. I happen to think, you know, it's very revolutionary in regards to what it's going to do for money and remittances and the global sort of payments markets or money in a global stage. Fundamentals don't always and often don't correspond or translate into price. Anyway, let's get back to the topic at hand, and let's kick things off with Bitcoin. So we're going to start things with Bitcoin. We had that smaller pattern on Bitcoin that we still see to get to play out. We had small patterns on a number of things that we looked at going into FOMC that all broke out of these sort of descending trend lines. Bitcoin was one. The S&P was another. So this hadn't even broke yet. It was here. And we said this is going to break and likely start to push to 6,242. We said that actually interesting, and you can gauge this from the markets. Well, if the markets are going up, we just had news of Iran-Israel. Is there going to be full-blown escalation on the back end of that if the markets are likely going up? Probably not. You know, certainly if you were a big market player, you wouldn't have your money in there if you thought that was going to be the case. And you're probably more privy to information than I am. And we are as retail investors. I'm retail. These people out there that think they're not retail because they're playing with a couple of $100,000. I've got news for you. You're retail, you know, and you can get wrecked in just the same manner. The US 100, again, another one that we looked at going into pre-FOMC. Kind of gave us confidence that they were going to do a larger cut than expected. And of course, NVIDIA. See how this is broken out and looking for that continuation. And of course, MicroStrategy was one that we looked at. And MicroStrategy on a macro news, Michael Saylor's thinking about doing a bank and all sorts of things. I want you to pay attention to this in terms of a phase one. Base, accumulation, breakout, retest. You're going to see a lot of altcoins I'm about to show you, and I can show you hundreds of examples of this. We do have our market mastery course, by the way. There's 80% off of that. Christmas is around the corner. So, you know, if you think someone might benefit, if somebody's interested in technical analysis, there's technical analysis that works and there's technical analysis that doesn't. So do perhaps can consider that if you are thinking about learning. But markets move in stages. Pay attention to this when we come to the altcoin market. We're still looking at like Tesla. I don't know what the hell they announced today. Awful candle here. I think this is going to take a little bit longer to set up in this right shoulder than we had initially expected. It did look, we were so confident here, weren't we, guys? We were like, okay, now we're going to get triggered. And all those people that sort of said, there's no way Tesla's going to do 505 in this environment, which we've just shown you isn't a bad one on the macro. And now look, oh, so confident here. I've kind of, my voice has dropped a little bit. But we're still confident this is going to get to that sort of 505. Amazon is likely going to squeeze higher at a time when you've just put a turbo of all-time highs and actually make this target that we had all the way back at the start or the end of last year. So Bitcoin. Start on a macro and work our way down. Looks great. We've got lots of technical confluence in regards to the direction that Bitcoin is going in. Whether that be this inverse head and shoulders, whether that be what we suspect could likely be a bull flag, or whether that be an inverse cup and handle pattern, an inverse cup and handle pattern, a cup and handle pattern. It's not an inverse one. Sort of flipping the chart would make it look like one, but it looks very obvious in regards to what direction Bitcoin is going to go when you invert the chart. For my dyslexic brain, sometimes it helps. I think we're all probably got a touch of something. For my dyslexic brain, it really helps when I invert charts. It looks obvious to me that this is going to sort of roll and see continuation. I had an Elliotician on the show, actually, and we're going to release that. We're just editing it. Many of you will know him. And he's based on Elliott wave theory. He's looking at a more long-dated theory, and he thinks that we're going to top out sort of going into 2025. He thinks we're not going to see those cycles repeat. We oppose that opinion, but also respect his opinion on it. Bitcoin up 30%, 3.3%. Wow. On the short time for Bitcoin, well, let's just do the macros on total 2. I honestly think this is, or total market, I honestly think this is a bull flag that's going to lead to that continuation. Total 2. Total market cap excluding Bitcoin and Ethereum to total 3. Bull flag, ready for that continuation. And others. And I think you're on the cusp of breaking out. And of course, this is all going to be led and largely permissioned by Bitcoin, which is on the cusp of doing so. You're really bouncing off this. And I think with October and November, October hasn't quite been the October that I promised you all. We didn't promise anybody anything, but we certainly thought October was going to be a good month. It still can be. Let's see that take place. There's lots of catalysts fundamentally that might take place that technically we're looking at. So we're looking at this just being a pullback in a broader uptrend. The breaking of this is likely going to be accompanied with fundamental news that we'll only know really at the time. Could it be FTX sort of giving that $16 billion back in cash? The selling's already been done, by the way, guys. We had a lot to contend with, and Bitcoin is still where it is. Whether that's the German government. It was news the other day in regards to Silk Road and the somebody losing a case against it. I think somebody was trying to essentially claim the Silk Road funds, a capital management company. And I'm like, you were never going to win that, were you? But there's going to be some sort of fundamental news that technically is going to be signaled by what we're looking at. When we look at altcoins, we just spoke about how markets move. It's very common when you break out, you get a retest. This looks just like the SPY before it did what it's done. And by the way, we were some of the few people, we've got all the proof. Go back to my channel back in 2023. If you become a Patreon, you can go all the way back to when we were making some of those calls to get in. Breakout, retest, continuation. Breakout, retest, continuation. It's doing it in the exact same manner. And this is what we have ahead of us. And we've just spoke about what the catalyst for driving all this is going to be. So why we're a technical analyst is because we find more comfort in trying to predict the future based on the charts than we do fundamentals. I just wanted to show you that. And also you could look at something like AVAX. Let's fly through some of these stages. ICP, great project most people are sleeping on. Chainlink. Doge, remember meme season is upon us, and we use Dogecoin and the breaking out of it and the retest falling wedge structure to kind of be a barometer for that. We're just showing you this in light of the S&P. Shiba Sheep, Live Peer. Sol's an interesting one because this is doing it at a far higher point. Let's get rid of the S&P now. Generally, the markets are in a great place. Lots of sort of phase 2 breakouts across the board, whether that's ETH, AVAX. And you can see volume profiles really line up well on this. Breakout on volume, showing the commitment behind it. You want to see that? You don't necessarily need to see that on the breaking down, because often that can be the reason why you're breaking down. Something dropped there. Not sure what. And then you've got the decline in volume. There's no commitment in this. There's no oomph in the altcoin market, I'm afraid, guys. Nobody cares about altcoins. You know, we've got some of the most viewed content when it comes to altcoins on the whole of YouTube. In certain topics like ICP, HBAR, even XRP, some of our XRP videos have got 80, 90,000 views in the past couple of months. One video. There's 2.4 billion people that use YouTube monthly. There's 8 billion people in the world. You are very early. And now is such a perfect time to be interested in the cryptocurrency space. You want to find out what I'm buying, do consider becoming a Patreon. There is a link to that in the description, or there might not be. But I'll look to leave one. If you go on my daily, you'll find it. Something like Link, you can see these sort of breakouts. And we also highlighted really interesting structure in regards to falling wedges. This is interesting because Bitcoin's about to rear its head. Global liquidity is about to really get going. You know, the Fed's now signaling what they're going to do. The stars really are aligning, guys. We looked at a number of altcoins. So we looked at the likes of Algorand and how we thought this was a falling wedge. You're on the cusp of breaking out. You did break out. You're going a little bit sideways. You're kind of basing it, finding support that you'll likely bounce off of. Remember, Bitcoin's going to permission that. H-bar. Let me show you a falling wedge example whilst I'm going through these, because I haven't got the schematic up. I'm going to use ETC, Ethereum Classic. That's not an accent of anyone, by the way, guys. You don't want to get accused of all sorts on the channel. Where are we? Get over here. This is a great example of a falling wedge, if ever I've seen one. Kind of ugly because we've got it split, but hey ho. Come on. Notice what you do once you break it. And then off you go. This is going to align with Bitcoin. Let's go back on it. ADA had one. I think H-bar is going to do an ADA-like run this bull market. Personally, not a guarantee. You can't take that to the bank. You could put your money in H-bar and lose all of it, by the way, guys. Filecoin. Doji. Dobra Doji. A cash network. Shiba Sheeb. This did really well from the breaking out of that funnel. Remember, there's also sort of a phase analysis going on there in regards to expecting it to break out. Look at these. Textbook, even in regards to pullbacks. You're going to see that continuation. Jasmine. I still need to do that price picture for Jasmine, guys. I do apologize. Render. Sushi. Oh, I need to stop with these accents. Oh, no. Sushi Swap. Uni did very well recently, didn't it? And then we're back to Bitcoin. So what I want to do now, guys, is just leave you on some final thoughts in regards to, I think the market's well positioned. When you look at the macro picture, when you look at the micro, I know a lot of people turn up when I say we're not in a recession and we don't think the economy is in bad state, and they say, yes, we are. Just show the stats that we are. I know there was 2 negative quarters, and then they said, okay, well, that's not a recession. It kind of has always been the definition of a recession, but I remember speaking to David Bell about this, and he said something that was really, I was like, oh, actually, that makes sense. He said, if you have 2 negative quarters, what happens if those quarters are just slightly negative, and then the next one you're massively up? Was that really a recession? You know, the 6-month recession, is it? I mean, technically, that's the definition, but you need to provide nuance when it comes to the markets, I think. But the markets look good. Markets look great generally. Meme season, we got clown for that. Don't be that person, by the way. Tesla getting smashed today. Oh, I'm going to have to sort of hide from family members that have got back into Tesla for the next little while. Don't be that person that will say something. We'll say, we think the market's going to do this. And just because it doesn't happen instantly, remember markets, we started off with that quite at the start, are very good at taking from the impatient and giving to the patient. Let's dive over to some questions now, guys. I'm going to check how we are for time. I know you guys, I'm sure, are going to have some questions for me. 834 of you watching. Fantastic, guys. 517 of you over at Twitter and 316 of you on YouTube. It's only up from here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to go ahead and bring my tablet up and take a little look. How long have we been going on for? Nearly an hour. So we've got enough time for questions. I'm going to go ahead and look at some of your questions. I don't know if we've got any sent over to me. Yes. Wow. We've got quite a few. Okay. Prediction for ICP this bull run. It's hard to say exactly how high it's going to go. We did look at a technical roadmap. I don't really want to go over it again, where we could see it, depending on what it does from now to the upside, it could interact with key levels that might see it form broader structure. So give us technical targets, just like with Bitcoin, we're looking at 151K. We could maybe say, look, we might be looking at a $200 ICP. Potentially, do I think the market cap can get that high? Yes. For this project, ICP could be $1 trillion project if they do what they've set out to do. If they're successful, remember, there's no guarantees of that. And this is not financial advice. Nothing we do or say here is financial advice. This is all just my own opinion as a technical analyst, as someone that's been in the markets for a while and thinks he knows what he's talking about. It's up to you guys to decide whether that's the case or not. I could see plausibly something like ICP maybe getting to that $200 mark, certainly towards it. Is that going to be the ultimate high for this bull market? I have no idea, guys. I think I made a big mistake in the past, going into the past bull market, of predicting things like ADA getting from $5 to $7. And that was largely based on where I thought its market cap could get to. Now, for me, it went from cents to $3, an amazing return. I think my average entry was about 8 cents. But it didn't get to that 5 to 7. And I think what I really ought to have done was look for technical patterns. And there was one for ADA that would have got you out close to the top, not perfectly at the top, because it went a little bit higher, obviously on the back of the Alonzo hard fork, and gone from there. So really with price predictions, if there isn't something that gives us that big price prediction, I can't really give it. With ICP, it's still very much ranging. We think it's broken out into phase 2. If it sets up structure from now on that journey to the upside, there is potentially the scope, I think, for it maybe achieving the likes of $200. But you know, there's a lot of ifs, buts, and maybes in regards to that. CC, nice to see you in here, mate. Been bleeding out since March, but our time is coming very soon. Congrats if you guys have stayed in the market for this long. Absolutely, mate. Remember, the markets are good at taking from the impatient and giving to the patient. Paper hands versus diamond hands. Yep. There is the time to have paper hands, though, I would say. We don't plan on being around in terms of holding crypto. We plan on being around, and we'll always be looking for opportunities, but we don't plan on holding through a bear market. And we like to be a little bit more intricate than that, certainly when we see things sort of lightly cascading to the downside. I hope we are early, but also hope that we progress to the priced out phase quicker than in other industry booms. Yeah, it depends what industry. Some industries have moved very, very fast. If you can only own 6 cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, to cover all bases, which other 5 to choose? Oh, it's a hard one. I think I own over 20 cryptocurrencies. Of course, I share them with the Patreon members. Cryptocurrencies that I've spoken about publicly is something like HBAR, ICP. I hold. I obviously hold something like XRP, so that's more of a financial basis. HBAR is more of a sort of institutional adoption of crypto tokenization basis. ICP is more of a sort of infrastructure to the internet enabling basis. I'll give you those 3 because we speak about them publicly, but then you'd maybe want to get exposure to 2 more areas. So you've got a good layer 1 there, HBAR. You've got also, well, they're all layer 1s. You've got the likes of ICP, which is doing something quite extraordinary and different. Then I'd maybe look for maybe a GameFi play or a deep in AI play. You know, and I'd try and go that way. But also don't try and just cover bases. Invest in things that you see value in. So for me personally, I'm big into AI and deep in. I think that's a major sector that is not only bullish in regards to the traditional financial space, but also more fill. And my Bitcoin exposure is minimal. Very, very minimal, because my bet has always been that altcoins are going to do more than Bitcoin this cycle. Can you talk about your opinion on Polkadot and Algorand? Dot is just wrong on timing, in my opinion. And Algorand has companies, but working at 1 cent or $10 at the same. Nobody plays it. The thing is, again, fundamentals and value do not correlate, in my opinion. How a price is set is really just like the most simple thing ever, in terms of you've got a market. You know, I want to pay $10 for Algorand. You want to pay $5. Okay, no deal is going to be met. Eventually, there will be a deal that's met that the market determines as a fair value, and that's how the value for everything's set. And that's only dictated by what people are willing to pay for something. So if the hype isn't there and the sort of involvement and often value or fundamental value just doesn't even matter. And we also live in a world where if you look at the stock market, it's massively hyped up, or hyped up's not the right word. price to earnings ratios don't really mean that much anymore. All stocks are overvalued, but they're not really in relation to the money supply. And the stock market and assets more broadly have really just become a short money trade. We always say the yen is a short money trade. But DOT, I'm a big fan of the project. I really liked DOT and was very early on DOT because I really liked ADA in the early days when Charles did that 2015 whiteboard video where he spoke about input endorsers, the idea of Ouroboros and then the duplication of Ouroboros multiple times. Polkadot essentially just did a very similar thing. Their consensus is very similar to Ouroboros, and they basically achieved what Cardano had set out in 2015, way ahead of it. They now have 50-something chains running concurrent to the relay chain, and it's a very impressive project. Price appreciation just doesn't seem to translate, but they're good layer ones, and I think we're still at a very early stage in regards to where we're going. So I think they're both really good projects. Personally, are they going to do well this cycle? Is it going to be more hype driven? These are questions you've got to ask. I personally think I can see quite a few projects, at least initially, outperforming Polkadot and Algorand. That's my personal opinion. From a price point of view, does that mean that they don't? That's indefinite? No, I think the fundamentals and the sort of adoption will shine through, and the hype comes on the back end of that when other projects might, concede against them. But at least this cycle into the early, more broad stages, I don't think Algo and Polkadot are going to do as well as others. Something like Sui, I think, has a lot of hype around it. Something like Polkadot, that's not Polkadot, sorry, Sol. These are kind of institutionally favored. When are you getting Dominic on your podcast? Anytime Dominic Williams, who I think is just a genius and a pioneer of this entire space and a visionary for it, wants to come on the show, I will make time. He could come on at 3 a.m. I'll stay up for it. So if anybody knows Dominic, tell him we'll interview him whenever he wants. And anybody that's working or has an interesting project in ICP, reach out to us. We're always looking to do interviews. We've got a couple of interviews in the pipeline. Got a really interesting interview coming up next week. I don't want to say anything about because I don't want to jinx anything, but it's somebody that was fundamental in the Web 2 space. Links to Google, did things at Google, that is now in the cryptocurrency space working on a project that we may or may not have mentioned during the course of this video. Recession, dollar flooding to crypto. Look at Coinbase. I will do. Do you know what? Let's actually take a look at one thing, which is Coinbase. So Coinbase, to be transparent, is one of those stocks that's done exceptionally well for me. It was a stock that, what have we got down here? No Coinbase down here. It's a stock that we were predominantly loading up on, me and Patreons, in the $30, $40 range. Obviously looking at what we do look at, which is traditional technical patterns. So down here, there was an inverse head and shoulders here, by the way, as well, lower down, that took you to here. And this has formed a bigger one. So this is how I can see some of these alts playing up, and then we can predict patterns. Breakout retest. Remember what we just looked at with the altcoin market. This is going to rear its head. This has just done the same thing that the market has generally done. The good thing with this, we still have that broader target at $413. Doesn't mean it's going to get there. That's just a target that we have for it. This is still in, and we've just released our when to sell course, which is really based on trend following. Because how do you know when to sell an asset? It's a very hard question. There are a couple of acceptable answers, but this is still in a broad uptrend. And you've had no invalidation here. It's done really well. It's had a bit of a prolonged pullback. I don't think it's going to be long before this rears its head. Certainly if we're as bullish on all those macro drivers and we're looking at liquidity and we're looking at the altcoin market doing what it's doing, there's no way that Coinbase isn't going to appreciate from that. Coinbase could become one of the bigger companies out there. In my opinion. So I'm just going to dive back to the questions. I've seen a lot of smart TA guys saying Bitcoin will have a final pullback to the 52 to 47K range. I don't think it's a big call to say Bitcoin could go from 47 to 47K when it's currently at 60. And always be careful of these people that say it could go up, it could go down, and then, it could go to 47K, but it could also go to 100. You're not predicting anything there other than what people already know. To grab liquidity before we go full steam, what are your thoughts on the pullback before we go full bull? It could happen. How can I say it can't happen? Be careful with these people that say it's to grab liquidity. What do you mean by that? And can they explain the theory behind why they think price is going to gravitate towards what they deem a pocket of liquidity. What are they talking about? Are they talking about ICT, the insider trading circles theory on those, what is it, fair value gaps and things like that? Is that what they're basing that on? I don't know this whole concept of, or I'm unfamiliar. People use heat maps and things like this. I'm very unfamiliar with people. I would say 80% of TA that's on YouTube is BS. My own personal, and let's look at the Bitcoin chart actually in regards to 42K. Let's take the bear case here, because saying it could go to 57, I mean, 57K is there. Saying it could go to 42, I mean, could it? But what's that based on? Could, but what's it based on? You'd want to maybe see things on the smaller time frame to dictate that, like losing this wedge, or at least losing the splitter thus far. Right now, whilst we're holding this, we're base case that the upside's on the cards. If in regards to 42, even though I don't know what the theory is, the one thing that I do know a lot of people use, and I use Fibonacci's as well, is maybe there's a fib level there that they're looking at. It's not even a fib. Oh, okay. Depending on how you draw it. Maybe they're looking at the 50% fib mark coming into tact. And in regards to a pullback, by the way, this hasn't reached this point where you'd kind of start saying, okay, it's time to get out. And this whole move is going to be retraced. Fibs are a good tool. This bounced perfectly off the 618. And you've held that. That's a good sign. I don't think you're going to necessarily go below it. So I don't really see much merit for 52K yet until you do. And that's just the game of technical analysis, I'm afraid. So I'd have to know why they think it's going to go there. In regards to grab liquidity, I don't understand the concept of grabbing liquidity. Maybe I'm a noob. I don't know. How high do you see Casper going this cycle? I'm unfamiliar with Casper. I haven't looked at Casper in a long time, but it's done very well. It's the Bitcoin or the silver to Bitcoin. Yeah, it's just a super strong chart. I don't like that particularly, but it doesn't mean anything. Certainly if the space is going to go up, it's going to go up. In terms of price prediction, I have no idea whatsoever. A little bit droopy, but I really couldn't tell you in regards to Casper and where I think Casper's going. I am fairly largely invested in multiple cryptos. My main concern is it being used to socialize us and not actually decentralize us. I think that's exactly what's going to happen, by the way. What thoughts on crypto being weaponized against the people? Yeah, I think largely that's exactly what's going to happen. You know, I believe the agenda that's being thrust upon us is they want a one world government and system. That's going to involve a one world money, an internet of value where everything connects with one another, and blockchain is perfect for that role. And they say when decentralization is an onion that has many layers. Something can be decentralized in one point, but not in another. Let's have this debate maybe as the people watching. Is Hedera decentralized? That after the aliens landed. Well done, mate. Great. Good take. Put down the pipe, man. Let me ask you guys a question. Is Hedera decentralized? Yeah, H-bar vid coming out after this one. Okay. So a lot of people say, the reason I brought that up was a lot of people say Hedera isn't decentralized because it ultimately has, instead of like anybody being able to join and validate the network, some of the largest institutions like Google, IBM, Mondelez, the people behind Oreos and all these other things, and Cadbury's, you know, all these other big institutions, I think it's 31 of them at the moment, they essentially do the job of the Bitcoin miners, okay, in regards to validating the Hedera network. Now, people say, well, that makes them non-decentralized because there's only 31 of them. They all run 2 nodes. Well, actually, they're more decentralized in some aspects than something like ADA, for example. ADA has way more validators. I'm one of them myself. I've been running a stake pool on ADA. ALLIN is the ticker. If you want to stake your ADA, you know where to go. Since 2021, I've been running a stake pool. However, the vast majority of ADA stake pools, validators, run on Web2 services like Amazon, the very companies that people turn their nose up at in regards to Hedera. So there's levels to decentralization. You know, how, where I'm going with this in regards to that question is, some things aren't as decentralized as people make them out to be. Even if you look at Bitcoin, the vast majority of Bitcoin is done in the same place by the same people. And if you look at Bitcoin miners and who holds the lion's share in them, it's always BlackRock and some of the largest institutions in the world. That's one reason we were bullish going into all this, is because we know, you know, the right players are backing this space. It's interesting, isn't it, also that crypto has given the most amount of money to sort of the campaigns recently. Casper looks terrible. We're going to keep going with your questions. Goodness gracious. Fetch or render, if you had to choose. I own Fetch. I've been public about that. And obviously ASI now. Render's a great project also. Render's computing. A big fan of DPIM. Big fan of DPIM. Largest companies in the world are kind of like centralized. They're not DPIN, they're kind of PIN. Physical infrastructure companies for the internet. Is PIN a bad euphemism for something? I'm just trying to think there. You know, essentially, I think that you're going to have decentralized versions that have big trade-offs and do very well in regards to what some of the centralized largest companies in the world are. And I honestly think you're going to get multiple $1 trillion layer one blockchains out there. I think DeepIn, you're going to see a few come out of. I think AI, certainly, if it does as well as we think it's going to do, and certainly if it starts to achieving singularity. But I personally own FET. Take that for what it is. We can't tell anybody what they should and shouldn't buy. It's you know, entirely up to you guys what you choose to do. Let's dive into a few more comments, if there are any. Hedera is governed by the council, for which every seat has an equal input. Yep. They are a single entity comprised of different entities with competing priorities, beliefs. Good question. They each run a node. I think they each run 2 nodes, and no 2 of those nodes can be on the same servers. Ah, there we go again. There we go again. We're getting rid of the Mac. It's going to have to go. There's a laser one that it did the other day. I don't know if I can get that back up. No, but yeah, Hedera is in our opinion decentralized to more of a degree than actually some of the others out there. Have been holding years and has done nothing. What are you referring to there, mate? So we can look at the chart. What do you think of Earthlings? Shout out to Earthlings. Earthlings is a pretty cool sort of gaming project on Hedera. On the topic of the Cardano Summit, by the way, it's interesting, isn't it? Is it Richard Teng speaking at the Cardano Summit? I'm gutted. I could have gone. I'm gutted. I haven't gone now because I'd love to have seen that. I'd love to have seen Charles and some of the other people, but certainly the Richard Teng speech I'd really have liked. When exiting position, do you stagger your sells or sell at once? I assume the former. No, not really. So if a price prediction or a target gets met, I'll walk away. Or I'll basically follow the trend up, and I'll essentially know at what point when it retraces, if it takes a certain level, then I'm out, and that trend's now likely going to change. Thoughts on Mina? I've not looked at Mina in a while. The idea of the smallest blockchain seems interesting. Mina. I'm also a big fan. I think one thing that we need to pay attention to that we don't, because it's not the kind of hot topic right now, is IoT, the Internet of Things. Mina just never really recovered, did it? This is not going to be the longest chart I've got. Let's do crypto. Yeah. Again, what are altcoins suffering from right now? And if global liquidity is to rise, there's Slightly look like the global liquidity chart that we're just waiting to load. Yeah, see this? This is what altcoins are suffering from. There's a lack of interest. There's not that water level rising, but it shall come. And we've spoken about why it shall come. I don't really know, Mina, to be fair, in terms of fundamentally, I'm not up to date with the project. It looks a lot like a lot of the altcoins. It's on support. You know, don't short support. I'd look for upside here, certainly if the space turns generally. In terms of it as a project, I'm really out of date with it. I like IoT. I like these sort of plays. I think they're going to do quite well. I'll answer a few more questions, guys. Then I'm going to love and leave you to your Fridays. Yeah, the CEO. So Richard Tang's the CEO. Oh, wow. Are you thinking about doing a meetup in the UK to speak about crypto? I would love to. Eventually, we'd like to put on events like what Consensus and others do, but I think we're a little bit away from that at this point. In terms of an actual meetup, yeah, I think so. I think we'll definitely look to announce something like that in the new year for sure. Can we get rid of this idiot in the chat, mate? Ban this user. Yeah, mate. If you're going to be silly in the chat, you just won't be able to take part, man. It's like we'll take you and we'll put you in a naughty step so that you can be separate from everybody else. I mean, come on. Price prediction on Jasmine. So we haven't given our price prediction on Jasmine. I want to do a whole video on it, but as you've asked, if it sets something like this up, which it kind of already has, and it's still intact, you know, could you be looking at a 74 or 28 cents Jasmine? Maybe. I want to do a longer YouTube video on it, really explaining it. That's not our prediction. That's just something that maybe technically, if you take this level, you could be marching towards. And the level that you've got to take is the prior high at 4 cents. No, I'll jump back over to the questions. XLR. I haven't looked at XLR. I want to look at XLR actually, just because I haven't looked at it. Have we got any better charts? It's likely going to be its first bull run. Don't know. It looks to be basing. A lot of these altcoins, by the way, they've all had trend lines that they've been pinned under whilst they've been sort of going down, and a lot of them have broken out of it. So if you've got these sort of channels, you know, there's a change broadly coming, I think, across the board. And I think that's also happening as Bitcoin sort of starts to rear its head. XLR, no ideas in regards to price, where this could go, how high this could go. There's nothing that I'm really seeing to give anybody. Maybe on the smaller time frames, you know, you might have some sort of bottoming structure here that you could maybe predict up to sort of a point like here on the back end of. But generally with the altcoin market, you know, we don't think it looks bad at all. I'll dive over to a couple more questions, guys, easy ones, and then I'm going to love and leave you. We've got a video coming out after this one on HBAR and the ETF. Canary, who was it? Canary Capital, I think, just launched a HBAR ETF or a HBAR product. Good evening from Leeds. PopCat, interesting. What will do better, ICP or Chainlink? Really hard to say. I think Chainlink's a coin that people just aren't that excited about, even though you've got every reason to be excited. Velo, etc., etc. Thoughts on Mara? I'll give you Mara. Mara is something that I look at. I think miners generally look good. We can use that as a barometer for the space broadly, can't we? Mara looks good. To me, it very much is mimicking the IWM. By the way, talk about technical targets coming to fruition in the last bull market. Look at that for Mara. And I think you're going to have a rinse and repeat of what you saw take place last time once again. Lots of coins in this sort of position. It's very much IWM. So my prediction for Mara, by the way, it doesn't have to get there. You might buy Mara, it might go to zero. That might be a genuine outcome. I don't know. Just technically, when I look at it, I think you're looking at about a 10x. And it looks very IWM-y in regards to structure. You know, IWM, remember we spoke about Stan Druckenmiller, what he was doing and why this makes us bullish on the space generally. Dive back to one last question, and then I'm going to love and leave you guys. Sui or Aptos? Sui for me, I'd say. Swissborg's own coin. Borg, please. I don't know how I feel about the sort of exchange coins. I don't think October's a wash. Yeah, it's what, the 11th? ALLIN, I have to say, you're one of the best YouTubers in the crypto market that I follow. Guys, we're going to leave it on a positive note. Thank you very much. Really, really appreciated. I'm going to love and leave you all, guys. 900 of you in here right now. It really is a pleasure. We're going to keep doing these. If you guys keep showing up, we'll continue to do them. On that note, I am going to love and leave you. Full moon dump, we shall see. Half moon pump, I'm not sure about all that. You'll have to go to a clairvoyant for some of that. Thanks a lot, everyone. Really appreciate you all showing up. It's always a pleasure. And I'll see you on the flip side. Have a fantastic weekend. See you soon.